have various committees. We're going to send out a committee call by email. And if you're interested in stepping onto our board, please reach out, and we'd be interested in hearing what you have to offer. Also, please consider donating, because we need funds to run elections, and we need to get Kerry-Lynne elected next time we are in that position.
And get rid of who? Trudeau.
If your membership's expiring, you can actually renew it as well. So let's make sure everybody's signed up as a member of the party as well.
So I'd like to introduce our amazing member of Parliament, Kerry-Lynne Findlay, who has really stepped up. She is now the official opposition whip. I had no idea what that was even 1 year ago, so I had to look it up. It is a position of honor within our parliamentary system. So it is remarkable that our leader has selected Kerry-Lynne to take on that role and responsibility. She's given a budget to manage this role. It's an important position. It involves working with every single member of Parliament in caucus to make sure that they are well behaved in Parliament.
It doesn't always work, but...
And that they're there to vote when the time comes and when we need the votes out. So with that being said, I'm going to just hand the mic over to Kerry-Lynne. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you to Alex, our president, who's taken on this role fairly recently and certainly embraced it. And we're looking forward to your leadership and the wonderful tone and intelligence you bring to the role, and we thank you very much. By the way, when you get a Christmas card this year, most of you, I hope, will get it. If you don't get one, then let me know. I'll make sure you get one. But his lovely little daughter, she drew the picture on the front of it, Adriana. So it's a family affair, we'll say that much. And also in the calendar, you'll get their dog is in there too, Lexi. So she's our official mascot from the last election. So the family's all in terms of support for conservatism in South Surrey White Rock, and we really, really do appreciate it. So thank you, Alex, and thank you to our host, Edith, and her husband, Tom. They're so gracious. Everyone, as I came in, said, "Is this your house?" And I had to say, "No, unfortunately," to my friend Edith. So, but it's a gorgeous house, and yes, if I'm ever just wandering in the neighborhood, do be kind and let me come in. But it's wonderful to do this. And the Teppers, Brian's our events committee coordinator, and also his wife helped. Like, this is home done. This is a conservative party, so we didn't spend a lot on cake. But the food's marvelous, and thank you both. That's so kind. I also want to thank the rest of the EDA board, of which we have almost 30, I think, members, and many of you are here. So if you're on the EDA board, just put your hand up so people can recognize you, please. There we are. So if you have any questions and I'm not around to answer them, ask one of those people. We just had a board meeting this morning, so they're very dedicated, and I really appreciate it. Ottawa. So I'll give you a quick Ottawa update, and I'm happy to answer questions on any subject because I'm just going to talk about what comes to mind. And what comes to mind first is 40-year high inflation. This is really hurting so many Canadians. They call inflation the cruelest tax of all. And the reason for that is that when everything costs more, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter what your income level is, it bites into that. But for those who are lower income, for seniors on fixed incomes, for students, for young couples just starting out, it is particularly hard on them because groceries cost more, gas costs more, everything just costs more. On top of that, we were warning them, being the Conservatives, were warning the Liberals for a couple of years now that you cannot flirt with, I hope that's not my phone, flirt with inflation by continuing your flagrant spending. Spending on some supports for people during COVID lockdowns, and we can debate whether we ever needed to lock down or not, but assuming that they existed, which they did, then we agreed with some of the supports. What million to MasterCard, $10 million to Loblaws. We didn't agree with $50 million to the We Charity. We didn't agree with giving SNC Lavalin, that was embroiled in that huge scandal that saw Jody Wilson-Raybould kicked out and Jane Philpott left. We never agreed that they should have a multi-million-dollar contract to build tents behind the Toronto hospital that were never built. But they paid them up front. We pushed, the Conservatives pushed, and we were joined by all the other opposition parties to get the Auditor General to look into COVID-19 related spending. Her report came out this past week, and in it, among other findings, was that approximately 37 billion, and I always like say billion with a B, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying, $37 billion was just wasted spending on CERB alone. CERB was sent to people who were dead. CERB was sent to prisoners. CERB went to already fully paid full-time civil servants in the federal government who knew that they could take advantage of it. $37 billion of your hard-earned tax money to people who were ineligible or actually didn't even exist, including gangs. You know, this kind of incompetence is hurting everyone in Canada. The lack of caring, and if you listen to them, Trudeau in particular, he'll get up in the House and he'll say, the uncaring, unfeeling Conservatives. And we're sitting there going, you don't care about the average Canadian. Your inflationary policies are making mortgage rates go up. We have people right across the country who are hitting their triggering events, meaning their normal payments aren't even covering the interest, and therefore they must come up with a large payment on principal or up their monthly payments. And they're really stressed and pressed to do that. We had 1.5 million Canadians visit a food bank in 1 month in Canada. This should never happen in an affluent nation, and a nation where, frankly, we've got huge land mass, but we're not that heavily populated. This shouldn't happen here, and they have no answer for it. One of the big issues, and I mentioned this morning at our EDA meeting, is that there's millions of Canadians that still heat their homes with home heating oil. Why do they do that? Well, they don't have a situation like many of us do here in the Lower Mainland, where they're all hooked up to natural gas and things like that. They're in older infrastructure, older homes. 1 million people in Northern Ontario, millions of Canadians right across the northern strip of our country. 1/3 of people who live in Atlantic Canada still use oil to heat in the winter. And the Liberals don't seem to have noticed that winter comes approximately once a year. And in those places, it lasts 3 to 4 months. The average income in rural New Brunswick is $38,000 a year, and those people are going to be hit with a home heating cost this winter for 3 months. If it's 4 months, it'll be even more, of $7,000 a home. That is before they triple the carbon tax in April. And before you think that BC is exempt, we were only exempt from the federal carbon tax so far because we had a carbon tax of our own here. The law that they passed said that if provincial carbon tax legislation is not as much as federal, then the federal kicks in. So every Canadian is going to be faced with a tripling of the carbon tax the 1st of April. Now, you'll have seen us, if you watch us at all, and some of you do, in the House, talking about triple, triple, triple carbon tax. But it sounds better in French. Triple, triple, triple. So that just sounds more emphatic somehow. And we've all been talking about it because we're trying to get this message across. The last time emissions went down in Canada was under Prime Minister Harper. Do you ever hear that? No. Carbon emissions in Canada have been going up every year of their 7 years. So if carbon tax, which is really just a punishment on people, if carbon tax actually lowered emissions, you would see it in the results, but it doesn't. It's a behavioral science nudging. It's a political science nudging. It's not environmental science. And they say, well, it works because people will change the vehicles they drive and people will act differently and do things differently. Well, if that was so, and if it really worked, we would see some results. At COP27, the International UN Conference on the Climate, that just took place in Egypt, and by the way, 35,000 delegates all flew in to a resort town in Egypt to attend that conference. We were found to be 58 out of 63 countries for environmental outcomes. So if we're doing such a great job, and if carbon taxes work, why aren't they working? It's because they're not embracing what we would embrace as conservatives, which is green technology, clean technology. Use the human spirit, the innovation that humans bring to the problem to help humans. Since forever, humans have been dealing with their environment, and they found ways to adapt, and they found ways to conquer it when necessary, and that's not the policy they're following. So we've got inflation at a 40-year high. We have people breaking under their mortgage payments. We have rental that is so high in Canada right now, particularly here and in Ontario. The average one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver is now $2,600 a month, 2 bedrooms, $3,300 a month. That's for a 2-bedroom, what I like to call box in the sky. We are hurting Canadians, and conservatives believe in bringing hope and conquering hurt and bringing hope. How do you do that? Well, you can only do that by having policies that actually make sense to everyday Canadians, policies that do not make it impossible for the basics of life. And the basics of life are home and shelter. The basics of life are food. I've heard 2 stories in the last 24 hours, one from Ocean Park, Safeway there, and one from, I think it was a Save-On in Coquitlam, where people were trying to steal basic food like noodles and Kraft dinner. One got caught in Ocean Park and they brought the bags back in. The one in Coquitlam, my friend was there, and they arrested the fellow, and he had just very basics like peanut butter and jam and bread in his packages, and he was crying, and they were arresting him, and the manager of the store was insisting on him being arrested. 1.5 million people at food banks, people doing things they would not normally do to feed their families. The percentage of take-home income now that is going towards shelter before you even get to food has risen dramatically. In some places as much as 63, 64%. So of course there's not enough money left for other things. So we're really fighting on that. The other thing we're fighting on right now is the new ban by the Liberals on hunting rifles. It is one thing to talk about, particularly in an urban setting in a downtown city, about handguns. It's quite another to try and bring an overall ban against most hunting rifles. Rifles that are used every day in every part of this country by hunters and farmers. It is a lifestyle that millions of people in Canada are part of. And they brought it in a very sneaky way by bringing in an amendment to regulations in our Public Safety Committee and then filibustering our attempt at trying to have a real conversation and bring in witnesses about it. Any of you who are, you'll have to wait questions, I'll take it again. Anyone who was watching Parliament on Thursday would have seen that Raquel Dancho, our MP from Manitoba, she's from an area, Brent's from Kildonan, she burst out from the front bench, "You're lying," to one of the Liberal MPs. He was lying, but we're not supposed to. There's a long list of things that are unparliamentary we're not allowed to say in Parliament. One of them is you're lying or you're a liar. You can say it's misinformation, disinformation. You can say that's not the truth or something like that. You're not allowed to say that. But she was so angry because he was saying that the Conservatives were unjustifiably holding up this legislation by filibustering in the committee and stopping the committee work. And that it's simply the opposite that is true. So she burst out. Now, I'm the whip, as has been told to you. I am, by the way, the first woman to ever be the chief opposition whip, to ever be the whip for the Conservatives. So besides the fact we might speculate on everyone needing a mother figure, it is my job to whip the vote and keep people on track. It's my job to keep decorum in the House. So, of course, I'm yelling over at her, "You can't say that." And, you know, she's 32 years old, very feisty, very informed. But to a certain extent, I'm not sure she realized quite what she did. She was just that upset that she said it. And the Speaker did something very unusual and frankly improper. He stood up, and remember, he's a Liberal Speaker. He stood up and said, "You must withdraw those remarks." And she looked at me, and I nodded my head, and she got up and she said, "I withdraw my remarks," and then sat down. And then he stood there and said, "And apologize." And she would not stand up and do that because what she said was true. So there was a standoff, and he ejected her from the House. He has that ability, but I actually happened to have lunch yesterday with Linda Reid, who used to be the BC Liberal Speaker in the BC legislature, and Linda said, that's absolutely wrong. By parliamentary procedure, if you've been asked to withdraw and you withdraw your remarks, then apology isn't part of it. No. But it was a standoff, and then it becomes you're challenging the Speaker. But she was right. Hi, dear. Good to see you. But she was right to do that. In any event, we were about, after we finished, we were to have a vote. And so I went outside, and people said they want to do a scrum. If I had gone and done my whips walk, as we call it, that you would have seen if you watched the proceedings, the Liberal whip and me, we walked down the middle aisle together, or on each side, make sure everyone's sitting down ready for the vote. We bow to the Speaker, and then we bow to each other, and then we sit down, and the vote can begin. But if I had gone and done that, there wouldn't have been any time for the scrum. So I suddenly had to go to the bathroom, and I had to lose myself in the lobby for 15 minutes to allow that scrum to go ahead. But I couldn't go out and stand beside her because, as the whip, I am responsible for decorum in the House. So she did that press conference. She stood her ground. A lot of our colleagues came and stood around her. And in fact, when she left the chamber, a lot of our colleagues got up and walked out to show that they didn't agree with what had happened. But that was what happened on Thursday, if you were wondering what all was going on. So I don't know what's going to happen this week. This is our last week before Christmas and December. I have to fly back in the morning. I expect some more of the same perhaps, but people are a little tired. Sometimes mistakes get made at that time. But we are a very united caucus. Pierre Poilievre has united us. He won 330 out of 338 ridings in the leadership. Of the 8 ridings he did not carry, and by the way, way, he got 78% of our membership vote here in South Surrey White Rock. We were one of the winners. And I thank you as his chair of his campaign here in BC, and my husband Brent was regional manager. Of those 8, 6 were in Quebec and 2 in Ontario. So we've come back, the people who supported other worthy candidates like Surrey and Lewis and others have come